But all right, so if he comes in while I'm not looking at the screen, let me know.
Will do. Yeah, he's in.
All right, fine.
Awesome.
Okay, let's get this show on the road. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Love you. You got Superman on your shirt. That's
Woo!
so cool.
Just for
And
you.
And who's that guy next to you? I recognize him every once in a while. He's
Some-
look at the look on
some
your face.
vagrant.
He's like,
I just wandered in.
you did. I see you every once in a while. You know, I have a little, just a little side to tell you. My husband is very often in some of the, especially the live Facebook videos that we do when we're out walking around, and he is known as the guy who follows us around or follows me around. And sometimes he's in my car. Sometimes he's just walking the streets. Sometimes he's in the shop. Sometimes I even see him in my bedroom. It's kind of weird.
I'm Phil
know, right?
Stalker.
I know I love that guy. That's and for people that know or don't know him, that is my husband, Ken Chin, and he will hate me because he hates his first name. Most of people know him as Storm, and he is the man that's actually responsible for this show itself being the what it is. So crazy thing. All right, so let's get to it. We have with us Dead Door William. He's our first chair co-host. Dead Door, go ahead and say hi and introduce yourself and all of that fun stuff.
Good evening, guys, and hello, DA. Long time no talk to, but
Has been a while. How you been?
I've been dead as always.
I know,
I
and
have all the limbs together, so we're all good.
go ahead and ask him who the gentleman is that is sitting next to him, because I don't have the name written down yet.
Superman to his right. Yeah. Who do we got there, DA?
That guy that's
This is,
following you around.
Who's your stalker?
This is Phil
Who's your
Morrison.
personal
All the
stalker?
cover of my books.
I'm pulling up your
Yeah.
information, you guys. Just not ignoring you. Promise. All right, let me. If you we usually used to do this with
Just audio.
just audio and all of that, and so you guys never got to see this. But the other part of what I was going to try and say is that I normally would do it on just one computer, and so while you're talking about whatever you're talking about, I'm looking this way, but I'm actually not watching the screen, and I'm looking behind all of this stuff. And I would rather have a visual on, so just in case somebody decides to dive on the interview, which you may or may not want to do, and I was looking right at you, or anything like that, or stuff like that, and all that kind of stuff.
We know we'll come after you.
Yes.
All right, now I'm gonna, because I have no real short-term memory at all, I'm going to ask you what your name is. I already know who DA is.
Phil Morrissey. Basically, I do his cover work, a lot of design work. I'm just a graphics monkey, essentially.
Oh my God! Did you,
Ook.
Jane? I don't even know who is on with me right now. Dead Door. I was so excited to see this graphic that you had made, Phil, for tonight's episode, and I was like, I asked DA, I'm like, who made that? That's like super cool. And he's like, Phil did.
Yeah, I wanted to take credit for it, but I thought, no.
Scum!
I know, right? But he didn't take credit for your work. What did you?
That was totally me.
I'm going to pull your nose up, I swear to God.
I know, right? Just right.
But in a nice way.
I know, right? Yeah, or rip your lungs out through your nose, but in a very nice way.
That's it. You always do it with a smile.
I know, kinder,
As long as I get it from our adorbs.
Or you,
Yes.
you want? See, DD is always looking out for his just desserts. All right, so now that we've got all of that taken care of, I would like to be able to see a little bit more with the backdrop that you have.
Oh.
I know that you have a 6 foot or something or other
Here this
kind
way,
of thing
Phil.
going on.
This is pro things here,
Yes.
doing professional work.
That's
Okay.
cool. Darkwater,
Our composition's terrible.
Darkwater Fiction.
right, Darkwater Fiction. Yes, this is my first rodeo here, and I've never done this before. I have no idea who the person is that's supposed to be doing this, and you know, that's just the way that is. And Phil's looking like, what? I don't understand.
I'm just leaning. It's like I'm like the guy in
All right,
gravity.
you can, if you want, you can move back to where you're comfortable. Because I was just like,
Shuffle,
I
shuffle,
tried-
shuffle.
I tried to get that to work, but well, you know, DA's kind of a big
The
guy.
banner's like 6 or 7 feet,
Hang
feet
on, I'll
long.
pull it over
but it's,
there.
Yeah, but it's
Oh wow, I got
We
so-
could have done this. It's like,
You could have done that, but you went to do that.
it's up and down as opposed to lengthwise. It would have been.
That's-
I have another banner, but it's at his house.
that's why I'm the visuals guy.
I know, right?
There you
Dang.
go.
Me do words and stuff.
Me draw
All right.
pictures.
All right, guys, so it's time to get a little bit serious now, honestly. All right, so DA Roberts is the author of fiction, primarily in horror, dystopian, and science fiction genre. You're born in Lebanon, Missouri, and now you live in Springfield, Missouri.
Mhm.
I feel a little pattern going on there. You have a wife and sons, which is very cool. When you're not writing, you actually have a very serious job. You are a deputy sheriff and a corrections officer, which you made, I think, last year, right?
Yeah, I was.
The higher up?
I got my post certification last year, but I've been a CO for almost a decade.
Crazy stuff.
Well, congrats on that.
Thank you, sir.
I know, right? Yeah. So, part of what we do here is we show that it is possible to have an extremely aggressively serious job during the day or at night, whatever your shift is, but also to be able to have a creative side. And that is really important for a lot of the creatives that we bring on here, because it also helps to relieve tension and gives a little bit more of a normalcy to their daily life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I started writing as a kid. So I've been writing for basically my entire life. But once I got into law enforcement, it really became more of a catharsis for me. If I'd have a particularly stressful day, I would put words to paper, and that would give me a vent to get rid of some of the things I dealt with. And I'm sure you remember about 4 years ago, I was hospitalized pretty seriously. I was afraid that my writing career was done because I had such a severe concussion. I couldn't write for like almost 3 months, and I was so happy when that finally came back. That my faculties got back to normal, well, as normal as it gets for me, and I could return to what I really love doing. It was just writing, and I plan to do this for as long as I have the ability and Phil sticks around.
I have been enjoying your Ragnarok Rising saga. Give people a little bit of idea of what that is. You've got some zombies. You've got Norse mythology. Say that 5 times fast.
Pause.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it 5 times fast. I would get all chewed up over that. But I wanted,
Not going to bother.
yeah, I wanted an approach to the zombie apocalypse that was a little different. That's why I blended in the elements of Norse.
Yep, and I know that. Give me a little bit more. This is a talk show.
Oh, fine. Okay. Generally, I'm getting me to shut up.
Pontificate, Doug.
Yeah,
Pontificate.
getting me to shut up is usually the problem.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with the Viking, the zombie apocalypse, if you look back from movies all the way back to the 60s, all the way up to modern day, they've had every explanation known to man. It's radiation from space or this or that or the other, some government experiment that went bad.
Viruses, chemicals,
Virus-
nuclear war.
Exactly, all of that. Sometimes a
All
combination.
usually technological.
But I wanted something that was, well, uniquely my own. And when I started doing my research into Norse mythology, the time of Ragnarok, which is the Viking Armageddon story, it says that during the time of Ragnarok, Loki will lead an army of dead from hell against the world of men. I was like, well, that and I also read that that Ragnarok is a cycle, and it happens every so often throughout Norse history, and it changes each time. And I'm like, well, what happens if it's this time during the cycle? What if the dead came first? And what we merely thought was the zombie apocalypse was leading up to full-blown Ragnarok, and that's what the series evolves to.
Yes, yes. All right. So when I first started doing this show, they saw Zombiepalooza Radio, and they automatically, a big part of these people who had no idea what the heck this was, said, well, okay, it's zombies, and it's showing people how to make themselves look ugly and go scare people and do all of this other kind of weird stuff that I really don't understand. And that was it. And they basically shut the door on it. But what I have found is that it not only it's that, but there's a lot of research that can go into these projects. People don't really understand. Those who are on the outside of creative life don't understand that there is a huge element where you have to put some realism in there, and a lot of times that takes research, and it takes poking around in maybe perhaps your local area, or if you can, go into the place where you want to have the event, all of that. So I would like you to talk about those elements that you bring to this project, and give us an idea of what it is you did to make it the way that it is.
Well, I've always been a firm believer that any story stands or falls on the little details, because if you get the little details wrong, you have no foundation for the suspension of disbelief to be built on. And what I wanted to do was bring elements of my own life into it as well. I'm ex-military. I was in the United States Army back in the late 80s. And I also wanted to bring my law enforcement experience into it. And what I did was I blended elements of that into the main character and used real world tactics. I know the weapons, I know the tactics, I know all the lingo. It's because I've lived all of that. I've been the door kicker on the emergency squad. I was the E squad front man. The guy with the shield. So I know the terminology. I've been there. I've done that. I've taken my lumps doing it along the way, and I wanted to bring that level of grittiness and realness of the fighting to it. And I knew that if I could make the combat real, then people would be so enmeshed with that they could forgive the fact that there was Norse mythology coming into as well. So even when the series evolves to where they're using more swords than they are guns, even that, the elements of combat is gritty. You're talking about blade cutting bone. You're talking about the fine details that a lot of authors overlook. And I really, really wanted, especially the combat scenes, to breathe true.
There's a lot of work that's out there. There are sites where you can go and get your works published, and a lot of people did that. But then there is a bunch of stuff that's out there that is just not the kind of substance that we need if we're going to be serious about what the author, what the creative is trying to bring us. And we go and we read along, and then there's this thing that says, oh well, they use a particular they either say magazine, or they say clip, or they say and then they switch it around, or when they're describing slashing or stabbing, or they're doing something like that, it's off, it's not right, or it's not the right distance, all of that. And a lot of times with guns and things of that sort, somebody's like, oh, I can shoot this person from 600-700 yards away, and I'm going to use this little tiny gun. Doesn't work that way.
Now, the ballistics change over distance. It depends on depending on the weapon you're using, and like people that for instance use the word clip to interchange with magazine. Anybody that's spent any time on a range can tell you clips hold ammunition, magazines feed ammunition. They're totally different things. And if you're talking about putting a clip in a Glock, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. So, say if you weren't the kind of background that you are now, and you wanted to write a book that was like that, what kind of ideas would you have for those people who are very interested in getting the terms right, but don't know where to look?
Just about everybody from any walk of life knows somebody that's been in the military. Talk to those guys. They can give you the terminology, and and if it doesn't freak you out, go spend a little time on the range. Put some lead down range. We call it group therapy. You go out and you put your shot group in the paper. Group therapy is amazing. I can have the worst day in the world, and I go put a few hundred rounds through some paper, and I just feel great. I love it.
Absolutely. All right. So you have another piece that I'm itching to get to. You are also known in science fiction, and your science fiction piece is the Infinite Black series. This series is based on the hit video game Spellbook Studio, approached by Spellbook Studio to create the history of their universe. DA's series begins with the rich tapestry that is the Infinite Black. And let's talk about, first off, how you were approached and, like how they found you and all of that kind of thing. And then what they wanted you to do, and then how you went about giving it to them.
Okay. About the time the third book in my Ragnarok series debuted, I was contacted by some of the guys from Spellbook because they had read the first 3 books and they really enjoyed them, and they do a podcast as well called the Spellcast, and they asked me if I would do their Halloween show. I was like, oh, absolutely. So I did their Halloween show, and during the course of the show, we were yucking up and cutting up and talking about all movies we'd seen, and we all knew the same like Monty Python references, and next thing you know, we were cracking jokes like we'd known each other for 20 years. And at one point, a guy named Rob, he goes by Dire Monkey on the air, Rob says, we should have you write for us sometime. And I'm like, oh, absolutely, I'd love to. Just say when. Well, I thought they were just kidding around. Well, a couple of days later, they're like, no, seriously. We want you to pitch some ideas to us. So initially, what they had me do was pitch a history concept and some short story ideas. And the short stories I sent them, they enjoyed so much. They said, no, these need to be longer. These need to be in a book. And that's what I did with the first book, is I took elements of those the first 3 short stories I wrote and turned it into the first novel. And the second novel is about to debut. In fact, we're going to be working on the cover for the second novel later tonight.
Yeah.
Yay!
Seriously.
All right. So I want to, DA knows that I love him and my family all appreciate you, but I would like to now go and turn over to Phil Morrison. And what I would like to do, Morrison?
Morrissey.
Like the singer.
No, yeah, it's like, I'm not the Lizard King and I can't do anything. No, I'm sorry.
I'm going to get it wrong all night long. I'm just going to call you Phil.
I love you.
You are Phil. So, Phil,
yes.
What I would like you to do is give us some background on who you are and what it is you do in the creative sense, and then when it was exactly that you started creating with DA.
Okay, quick history. Started off basically in the late 80s working in the paper gaming industry. Companies like GDW, that did Traveler, worked for Steve Jackson for a short while doing Murphy's Rules, 3W, a couple other companies. In fact, one of them led to a product that I'm doing now, a magazine called Vortex, is where I got Stellar Babe from, which is the web strip I do now. Basically doing a lot of freelance work, indie comic stuff kind of through the A's and 90s. And then one of the things, unfortunately, being a freelance artist, as a lot of people know, doing freelance writing, art, whatnot, I ended up with a bunch of bad jobs, kind of a string of them, and they didn't pay. And one forced me to actually hire a lawyer to go get money. And at that point, I was taking care of my grandmother. She was starting to get older. It's like, and bills come in. So you end up working junk gray jobs. Plus I was doing some freelance advertising and whatnot. Right. How I met, it's like, and that kind of goes to me in the early 2000s until I started working in an art gallery at that point, and which kind of got me back kind of doing more illustration and comic work again. Well, with Doug, it was kind of sad. We knew each other from a convention I helped co-create called VisionCon, which we mentioned in the radio show. Okay. And Doug, we used to hang out all the time. We broke like a table one time, and I covered it up because I was co-chair. So I was like, this didn't happen. Yeah, shut up. It didn't exist. What happened though was that we lost touch with her for a long time. Just more, circles change and whatnot. But it was kind of sad how we got back together, but it was a good thing in a weird way. It's an Abraxas. It's both good and bad. We were both at a hospital. It used to be called St. John's. Now it's called Mercy, Mercy Health Systems. My grandmother was in for, I think it was pneumonia. And
my brother had a major heart attack.
Yeah. And what was
we
fun,
were there at the same time.
Literally,
we ran into each other.
Literally at the ER. In fact, we met in front of, we bumped each other in front of a vending machine, because I remember that, because you were getting a drink and I had just come back from the bathroom, and you were like, Phil, and I was like, Doug? And we just started talking, and then we found out, it's like we just started talking. It was kind of good. It was good, in a situation like that, it's good to bump into anybody. It's a friendly face, because hospitals, especially ERs, are the worst places ever to be, because, you really do feel, I shouldn't denigrate medicine, but ERs don't feel good, no matter what part of the country you're in, no matter where you are. It's like, they do good work, but they're just where bad things end up all at the same time, and you get stuck in the system. So it was nice to actually, have somebody. We were just talking, and then Doug mentions, well, he's been doing these book series. And I think, well, that's great. You're doing writing, and we started talking, and then he started discussing he was going to do it. Think about going on his own to do stuff.
Because that was about the time I was having trouble with my old publisher.
Exactly, and he was like, well, do you still do cover work like you used to? And I was like, well, yeah, I still kind of do some stuff. It's like, and I still do it very often. So he started telling me about the book, and then one thing kind of led to another, and his brother. Your brother, if I remember, recovered not too long after, and my grandmother, she was in there for about 2 weeks, but she snapped right back. It's like, and so we started contacting each other, and then I started making. And at that point, I was working at a company called ISL that I do work with now as for the motorsports industry, doing graphic design, T-shirt, and apparel, and whatnot. Ironically, we're one of the Ratfink licensees. If you want your pop culture thing, it's like we're one of the few that actually has a legitimate license, and I do that a lot for them. Speaking of old comics. But I started coming over, and we were talking about the covers, and that's when we kind of geneticized how we were going to do them. Because like we said in the first interview, it was very organic how we came up with everything. Now we're kind of more mechanical because we've got the basics down. They're done, but we still go through the same process creatively to do the covers that we did then, which was Doug said, well, we need to do. I said, well, if you're going to do covers, you need kind of have a standardized format at this point for each series. Like, so I come out of the comic industry and the gaming industry, and especially you do mini series, you always want to have kind of standardized things. It's like an identifying brand for that.
It's your branding. It's your branding for that particular series.
Exactly.
Elements.
Exactly. And to be honest, indie comic people, indie game people, indie writers need to really more think like that. They're better now than they used to be, but they still don't understand that branding is absolutely, as dirty a word as it can be, especially even in advertising. It's a necessity, because you can put things out there, but if it doesn't have a unified feel or look to it, most people will go, well, that's interesting, but it won't land anything. And if you're doing connected objects, you absolutely, it's kind of like when they reboot movies, like Spider-Man has had this problem horribly. It's like we're in the third reboot now. And people are just like, I'm done with it. I'm just done. It's like, because the problem is there's no consistency between the reboots. Well, in the way, and with writing, when Doug was talking about this, we came up with a strategy on how it'd look. And he gave me some ideas. Actually, he changed some of his stuff, not the writing part, not the story, but the way we presented the story actually changed in ways. Like, if you look in the books, the original one had no art in it. Then once we did the new ones, he came up with the idea, why do we do these chapter headers? And why do we do these chapter headers based on what is going on, but not as illustrations, more as iconic objects, and, operate from an abstract art point of view.
We put little icons at the beginning of the chapter along with the quotes.
And they do evolve. In fact, if you look at all the books, I've got like gigs of files now of this stuff. But if you look at some of these, you could see the imagery even evolving inside of the books as they go along.
If you look at book one, we have Wiley's badge. It says Nathaniel County Sheriff's Department. And by book 2, the badge is starting to become more damaged. And by books 3 and subsequent books, the badge is in bad shape. In some ways, one of the inspirations for this was kind of when Kurt Vonnegut did the book Breakfast of Champions. It has these weird, childish drawings all the way through it that are considered story elements. And personally, I was fascinated with that because, it's like at that point, it's not like graphic novels. I mean, this is a true, strange mix of art and literature
literature all of a sudden, where one's pushing the other and there's not these two separated worlds, which is something that is it should be vital to doing writing. Is the art and the writing should not be two separate places. They should be one place where both people are coming to basically, because the problem is sometimes you can get like if you ever look at the history of the comic book The Watchmen from the 1980s with Gibbons and Alan Moore. Alan Moore was a control freak and he was a little too good. Now Dave Gibbons didn't mind it because he loved working for scaffolding, but other artists couldn't stand it. Like Bill Sakinovich could not stand it on big numbers because it was too controlling. But on the other hand, you can go the opposite and just, like what a lot of companies do, they hire a hired gun to put a cover and maybe a couple of designs out. And there's no connection between any of the creative elements. And that's why you have things that don't hook up at all.
It's the same thing with a lot of writers. A lot of writers will submit their writing to a publishing company. The publishing company will contract someone else to do the cover, and the author will have zero input on the cover. The way Phil and I do the covers, I'm there from concept to finished product.
Yep.
And if we both don't like it, we just start over. We've done it before.
And we've had ideas that got torched. I mean, we tried to come to consensus, and it would be like, well, this can work. Can you do this? Well, I can do this, but the problem is I can't do that. Well, how about I try this? Well, this isn't going to work. And eventually, if an idea is going to fail, it usually fails on its own under those kind of acid tests because it will fall apart.
Phil came up with the idea that on the back cover of each book, you'll look at the books 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's literally a snapshot on the back of each book that is his exact rendition of a scene from the books, and those snapshots really tell a story all on their own. And if you look at them from beginning to end, you see the slow destruction throughout the series. Those are linking elements.
And that's something that actually comes from comic books and old pulps, because the thing is that if you look at those eras, the artists in some ways, because a lot of with the pulps and especially the early comic book industry, a lot of it was based in New York. All the artists and writers literally knew each other and sometimes ate at the same places, drank at the same bars, and hung out at the same locations. So actually they were exchanging ideas almost directly too at some point. It began to separate like in the 50s when hard publishing started taking over, and suddenly things start compartmentalizing, and then you have art directors kicking in who are just taking orders from editors at that point, and usually the owners of the company saying, we want to push this market, we want to push that. I mean, how many men's magazine covers in the 1950s and 60s had Nazis on them? It's like chaining up women. Story has nothing to do with anything in the book, but that's sold. And that was always the call down, Nazis and girls, give us Nazis and girls. And what's funny is some like Gil Evergreen, they showed like how he did some of his early pinup covers, and he had friends that he worked with. They showed like his goofy friends posing in outfits to do this. And they were talking about how much they had to do this all the time. And you have some poor girl, like, could you take your top off and do this? It's like, and you get these ridiculous, but the covers are ridiculous, but they sold because it was exactly what the market.
All right. I need to make sure that you guys can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right, good. Because my indicator lights are like all over the place. All right, so I know, right? So where do I want to go with this? All right. Gosh, I don't know where to go with this. All right. I'm like, because I've been listening.
It's your turn now.
I know. It's my turn now to kind of like, where the heck am I going to go with this? So.
Time for a dance number.
No, usually when I bring DA on, oh geez, thanks guys.
I can just hear people across Texas. These guys are idiots. Oh my God! Only one person gets to do that in this little square. All I can do is like bunny ears. Why am?
All right, so I'm gonna try and regain control of what's going on here.
Do it.
All right, so gaming is a really big, huge thing. My son, he plays Dungeons and Dragons. He's the head guy of all of that. I never really got into that kind of stuff, but he loves it. I'm interested in maybe a month or so bringing on a 5-hour that's all about gaming.
Ooh. Well, funny you should mention that, because we're working with a game designer to turn the Ragnarok series into a role-playing game.
You know what?
That's
quite some time ago, when you were on, I asked you if something like that were going to be a possibility, and you looked at me sideways and went, "Huh?" And that kind of like I think sparked a little something something. So it's really interesting to be able to watch how you can take one seed of an idea and expand it along lots of different lines. And with Phil, he's talking about the importance of doing marketing and how being able to keep some things structured, but then still allowing for other elements to be able to come into it so that you can expand the marketing or the brand itself. So, Phil, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Well, actually, personally, a quick personal example is like the comic we do with Stellar Babe. I work on with two other people. Chris Harris is my colorist, and he's designed the web design for me. And Tim Bauer is a lifetime friend. It's like who's been doing inking work with me for years. In a weird way, when I started doing the web strip, originally it was in a gaming magazine, like I said earlier, called Vortex. And, it was me doing one-pagers, because it was a monthly thing. And then when that went out, we expanded to doing longer stories. When I did the web thing, I wanted to do all the longer stories I wanted to do. Well, I have some friends also I work with, and I noted that the stories I came up with originally seemed to be pretty good, but then they would take the scaffolding and they'd run with it. And they were like throwing out weird ideas. It's like Doug's even thrown in a couple, strangely enough. It's like, I actually listened to him. God knows why. It's like, but the thing was, is I started noticing that the project itself got richer, and I was actually able to expand. It's because, and a friend of mine, Paul, said it best. He says the thing is, when a creator does something, sometimes they miss their own details because they're too busy building the world around it and all the elements. You might say something like, oh, well, it's like, well, wait a minute, when this character did this happened. Well, yeah, but it's not put in the story. Yeah, but if it did this, wouldn't this happen? Well, yeah. Well, then you could do this and this and then this, and suddenly you got another story. I mean, just instantly, and it writes itself, and suddenly, just like that. With Doug's stuff, go ahead.
Do you ever get parts where you're putting elements together, and you look at that and you go, "Yeah, I know that's there's something way more to that." And what do you do with that? Do you like jot the ideas down on a piece of paper, or do you keep them in your head, or do you draw it out? What do you do?
Both. In the case of what I do is that I do keep physical notes, sometimes sketches even with. I'll do a quick a piece of a mental shorthand with it. Sometimes if an idea is kind of off, I won't write it down right off the bat. I'll let it kind of roll and see how it interacts with all the other things, because like with Doug, when he did the Ragnarok Rising series, he gave himself that kind of leeway too. Somebody could throw in an element, and if it doesn't quite work, you give it time to see if it links, because normally with narrative, if something is positive or something feels good to the story or to the narration, it'll link on its own. It will,
right.
When you hear the line characters writing themselves, that's not a myth. Because at that point, you have done so much good world building, not boring world building, where it's like you talk about cups and saucers and what furniture's in the room. The thing is, the scaffolding is so good at that point that when you start putting things on it, automatically the ideas will start linking themselves together, because essentially it's almost a machine operating on its own. So I would say all of the above, C, to be honest.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about world building elements, because in gaming and for something that you are starting off as a seed project, you are responsible for putting these particular elements together. Number one, I want to have you talk about these elements, these different kinds of things that you need to put in for the world itself. And then number two, I want you to talk about how you know that these are the right elements to use for this particular series.
Well, what I did is I brought in a lot of real world elements. Some of the characters have not direct, but real world influences. Some of the characters have elements in them that are based on people I know. And a lot of people have asked me if I based Wiley on myself. Other than the similarity of careers, that's pretty much it. Actually, I had Michael Chiklis in mind when I created Wiley. The actor Michael Chiklis was who I envisioned for Wiley. Which always throws people off. They're like, well, that's not who I think of. Well, that's who I thought of.
But it's really good they don't think of that automatically, because in a weird way, that means that your character's touching people in strange ways that they see it through their own lens at that point. And that's actually a sign of success too in a lot of ways.
But when doing the world building, what I wanted to do was not only bringing in elements of the real world, but I knew I was going to be bringing in elements of Ragnarok, elements of Norse mythology. So what I did was I wanted to make sure the characters I created were not only believable, but then you've got to throw in the elements of the history of that world. You've got to throw in the locations. Your places have to seem real. They're for the most part in the Ragnarok series, the cities are really there, but a lot of the backdrops, like in book 5, I mentioned Traveler's Rest, which is the settlement they build. These are based in real locations, but these settings aren't there. But I wanted to give as much real world linking elements to base the fantasy elements on. That way, it blends into one big tapestry as opposed to just trying to create everything. When world building, your realistic elements have to really breathe the life into it. You can have the world of Tolkien. That world, you can become so enmeshed in the Tolkien books because he breathed so much life into that. He gave it a history. He gave it a pulse. He gave it a theme. He gave it a feeling. And I hope I've captured something of that, even if it's on a smaller level, because Tolkien really is the benchmark.
Absolutely. All right. So we're talking about getting the elements correct, and then we're talking about getting
actually, I didn't hear any of that.
You didn't?
No, I'm.
Ah! None of that?
I hear you, but I.
You? All right.
Help!
So you hear me?
Call the military.
Can you give me
Yeah, I
1
hear
second?
you.
You hear me, but he doesn't?
I hear you fine.
Okay, then it might be something with his headset.
Oh,
Yeah.
the headset came unplugged, Phil. Oh, there we go. Problem solved.
Yeah.
I think I stepped on it.
Thanks, Doug.
You're welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Doug.
I love you.
Oh yeah. Once again, this is how writers treat artists. This is like everything for the last 50 years. Everybody, this is how they think about us.
Yeah.
Try being on this side of the fence. Try that. Right?
Okay.
Because I got y'all, all of your characters on there bringing your own stuff and all that, and I'm just kind of like trying to remain calm and get, do what I got to do. All right, so we're going to go over, and what I was saying before that happened, you're talking about the elements of how you, what you pick for your real world elements. Then you're talking about your Norse mythology, which is your aspect, bringing into that realism, which causes the creative process to blend better. You've got the characters going on. Now we're going to step up to something that lots of people have difficulty in doing, especially when it is a creative work like this. We're talking about dialect and dialogue.
That one can be tricky. Well, for one thing, I don't do my writing at the public library anymore because I tend to do my dialogue out loud, and they think I'm crazy now. But I speak the dialogue to see if it sounds natural. If it comes off when I say it, if it feels stilted, it's going to sound stilted. I want the dialogue to be realistic. I want it to be the way people talk. And I've also noticed themes that I didn't even intend to do that I cropped up and it kind of carried through the book series. Like the character of Spec 4 in the books, she doesn't cuss. Wiley does. Wiley will drop the F-bomb fairly regularly, but Spec 4 doesn't cuss. You might find a couple of elements in extreme circumstances where she says something, but it's almost never happens throughout the entire series. And that was a character element that crept in that I didn't even intend to creep in. It just did. Sometimes these characters do take on a life of their own. And they especially on the writer side, I'm not sure about on the artistic side, but on the writing side, I have these characters so firmly established in my head. I know how they would answer about certain questions, and even if it's remarkably different from how I would look at it, I know how these characters think, and it's a little, sometimes it's a little unnerving because you can find yourself writing a scene and go, oh God, why would he do that? And because it seems alien to me, but it makes perfect sense for the character.
Right, right. All right, so we're going to go over to Phil, and because you are the artistic one who
Mildly artistic.
gives us mildly artistic. Very
Yeah.
cute.
Can't wait to finish the cover tonight, Dudley.
Hashtag mildly artistic. All right. Oh my God, and we do hashtag mildly
You're
artistic.
cool.
You guys are right. All right, so if we can get a little bit serious now about
Sure.
some of the stuff that you bring to the plate, so to speak, when you are looking at his dialogue, and you haven't yet quite figured out what exactly they're supposed to look like or the kinds of elements that they need to have along with them. We're talking about the nuances of these characters, those things that breathe the life into that character. How do you go about doing that when you are looking at dialogue and doing something from scratch?
Yeah, that's a dangerous question. Because really you are shooting blind. I mean, I'm not Doug, plain and simple. I can, the bad thing about being an artist is you, especially in this case, you're interpreting what they're doing or trying to get a feel for it. And when I read his characters, what I do is it's funny, he talks about doing dialogue out loud. I do the same thing. It's like, actually, I will trick friends into helping me sometimes and let them go back and forth. Because, well, I came from the gaming industry, and there's a lot of role playing, it's like with your little one, stuff like this.
We're both role players.
Yeah,
way back.
we're both role players. So, there you go. But
in fact, behind the tarp is probably 30 years of Dungeons and Dragons books behind the sign back there.
Yeah, we're
And yeah, there is. I saw him before he put that up there. Yep.
That's why we moved it, just in case, they're gonna know us we're stupid.
Hashtag's true story there.
Well, thing is that at that point you're literally shooting blind, and many times what I do is I'd go over his dialogue, I'd read the character, I reread it like 4 or 5 times, especially when I sensed something was very important. And this is how I got the cover, the basic ideas usually. Doug would give me a little bit of elements. I would read the books, and then I would kind of see what felt important, because I'm looking at it from like the way a cinematographer looks as opposed to a writer. So I'm seeing his characters not as words and things like this. I'm seeing them as physical objects moving around, doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry.
It was like some of the sketches he did. He started drawing in things I hadn't described that I later went back and added when he was adding in scars. I'm like, God dang, I didn't think about that, because some of these fight scenes would leave really nasty scars. So I actually went back and added in some sections talking about how Wiley got some of these scars.
Because I'm seeing it like film as opposed to seeing it as words. And that's not a denigration of writing. It's just a different way the arts form themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you talk about dialogue, that's actually something in comics you live and die by, because if your characters have stilted dialogue, people are out the door. It's like the joke in The Incredibles where Mr. Incredible catches Syndrome monologuing. It's like, and the thing is, unfortunately, too many people can fall into that, especially in comics. But in writing, it's also a tempting thing as well, because you have there was a Paul Anderson book done. I can't remember. I read this thing when I was like 23, 24 years old. And I swear there was a scene in this book that took 27 pages, and they were just walking on a beach for a quarter of a mile. And it was just boring monologue, dialogue going nowhere. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I could tell at that point when he was writing it, he kind of fell into a zone where it's like, the details suddenly became more important than the story. When comic people do this is where you can end up with a trainload of boring talking head panels where they're just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and it doesn't go anywhere. So to go back to the original thing, basically what I do is I get a feel for it. Then I would do a couple sketches, show them to Doug, and then I would give him the idea of what I want to do with the cover, what basic elements. And then he would start doing we use this and we don't use that. And then what I would do was re-jiggle them back into literally a story about the book on the cover. And that's where you go back to the pulp era. That's exactly what they would do too.
So we've long since believed that not just in the writing and in the artwork, but the social media, everything that we do with the books has to be linked. We've got to address across multiple media.
Yep.
Because if you don't engage across multiple media, you're not engaging the total audience.
Nothing is disconnected.
Right, that is exactly true. All right, so we're going to go over to DD. I think he has a question. Go ahead, DD.
Yes, so have you ever nailed, like, spot on one of your illustrations for him?
Oh God, yeah.
Which one? I want to hear you say which one, because it's like I know kind of which one I was thinking about.
Well, there's two, but one is my absolute favorite, but there's two that the second one. My absolute favorite is the first cover for the sci-fi novel. I told Phil what I wanted to do was to go. I wanted to give it a feel of like the old '60s sci-fi, those old pulp books, like the old Heinlein novels. I wanted it to give it that old sci-fi feel, and he nailed it. He nailed it dead on. And it's exactly what I wanted.
And I had to admit, that was the one I was going to answer too, because when he did, I mean, of all the Ragnarok covers, they were art where we could just put it together and just go crazy. But when he came with the first Infinite Black book, you know, he described the 60s look, and it's like, and I did a train load of research, because the thing was, I had like hundreds of examples of covers from 67 all the way to 73, like the Laser Book series. I think it was Ballantine put out. Trashy, but it had the right art, because it was it kind of throwback. It's kind of like combination of gouache and watercolors. Things are like, you know, weird, bright color choices, but then you're using like watercolor feels to get them to look. And then what I did was, when I did the original cover, some of the elements are actually hand drawn on, you'll get a laugh at this, photocopy paper. I'm not kidding. It's like the ship is actually, I've got the drawing in my house. In fact, I was looking at it just this afternoon when I was coming in, and it just sits there, and we scanned it in and then ran all these effects across it, because the thing is trying to get the feel of what that is. At that point, you're not only duplicating an art style, you're also duplicating what the mentality was of that era. And that is way harder, but I have to admit, it was a lot of fun, because it's absolutely outside the comfort zone at that point. Absolutely.
That is so cool. And that's the kind of stuff that I'd love to get here on the show, to show people how you can take an element, and if you've got a pretty solid background, like say in gaming or in a particular genre that you like, and take something and go with it yourself. A lot of times I get people like, well, I wish that I could do, you know, I wish I could write, or I wish I could like make a screenplay or a film, or I could do something creative. And I'm looking at them going, why not? So the wonderfulness about this is that sorry to tell you, but you guys are not young bucks, and so you've got some years in you, and you are still vibrantly creating and doing things that people in the next generation and after hopefully are going to enjoy once they see what it is and get their hands on it.
I hope so. I want to be like Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite writers. He's 95. He's still producing books. So hopefully I've got years and years and years ahead of me.
In comics, that would have been Will Eisner. I mean, he died, I think, over 10 years ago, but he was literally doing, in fact, he's considered the father of the American graphic novel. He had been doing work since literally, you know, the 1940s and 30s. He died at 91 working on a graphic novel. He had not stopped yet. He was at the table, and it was crazy. And like, you know, the thing is, it's because age has nothing to do with creativity. People can tell you all kinds of garbage, and, you know, and we hear it all the time. But and this is what it's funny, Jackie, you mentioned about creativity. A lot of people talk themselves out of being creative. That's the sad part. It's like, you know,
talk about that. Talk about instances where you've seen that, and what runs through your head when they do that to themselves.
Go first.
I've got several friends that, you know, have said, oh, I love your books, but, you know, I would love to write if I ever had the time. I said, well, you know, it's, you know, everybody's got the same 24 hours in the day. I've got tons of crap I've got to do every day. I work a 12-hour shift. If you want to write, you can find the time. And there's a guy I work with who came to me here about 2 weeks ago, and he gave me about 20 pages of a post-apocalyptic story he was working on. It wasn't zombies, but it was kind of Road Warrior-esque. And he goes, be brutally honest. And I read through it, and I'm like, Matt, holy crap, I'm shocked. This is really good. I said, I can see some areas where you got to fix the grammar, and some of the flow needs work, and your dialogue's just a little off. I said, but the story idea is fantastic. And he's like, seriously? I said, yeah, you need to be continuing on this. He goes, well, if I've got time. I'm like, make the time. The only person that's ever going to be able to write your story is you. He said, well, you could take this story idea and run with it. I'm like, no, I could do my version of it. I could never write your story. Only you can write that story. So now he's actually actively working on it.
All right. I'm looking actually right now for my next hour guest, and he is not responding to my messages. So, is it okay? Is it okay if you give me a little bit more then?
Oh, sure.
All right.
Getting us to shut up, that's the problem.
That's well, I don't know. I did it a couple of times already, and then I did it to myself, so it must be contagious. So that's your next work.
Oh, we're just all pros here today, aren't we?
I know, right? It's just, I've been doing this show now for a little over 4.5 years, and I still don't know what the heck I'm doing. So it's crazy stuff. All right, so yeah, go ahead, please.
I got one for Phil, because we hardly have graphic artists on the show. So, and I'd like to ask the wise questions. Phil, why did you get into the graphic design, graphic novels? What?
Oh, okay. That's okay. Let me parse that question out for a second. When I was in, you'll kind of get, Doug's really gonna get a laugh out of this. When I was in school originally, I was actually going for doing writing, believe it or not, because
I've read some of his stuff. He's actually really good.
Ironically, yeah, it's funny because actually I was a late bloomer when I got into art. I was actually around being almost 17, 16 years old when I started drawing. And the thing is, but I had a love of narrative and comics. And what got me into doing things was I wanted to create stories. But unfortunately, you realize this in art, and a lot of artists, and this is what's kind of scary, is they don't realize, you need to know all ends of it, like they used to in the early 20th century. It's like you can't just be a comic artist. You just can't do graphic novels. You just can't do illustration. Many times, most artists, at least honest ones, unless they're very successful, what they do, and end up with careers, people in comics like Brian Boland, who worked on Judge Dredd, he's got permanent jobs at DC in 2000 AD forever because he's done such a good job. And Marvel too, I think he did some work for them. No, that was Davis that did that. But most artists work, quote, real jobs. Well, if you're working in the arts and you work a real job, you work in things like graphic design, filmmaking, video game element design. In fact, you'd be amazed how many artists, will just do, breakdown work for video games. It's like, I know a lot of people on the West Coast to do that, but you work both sides of the fence. The good thing about it is what makes it so good though, when you do it, and this is why I learned early on in my 20s, is that there was no difference to me between graphic art and fine art. That was a fallacy, and the professors kept pushing that there's these two worlds there. They're not two worlds, because one bolsters the other. Like when I was in school, they would separate graphic design, and they would separate fine art, and illustration ends up in fine art. And like what I would do for Doug would be graphic design. But the problem is you have two broken people at that point. You have designers who can't illustrate or do, more abstract artwork, but then on the other side, you maybe have illustrators who can't work in the real world. And right. What do they do? What do those two sides do at that point, or painters or whatever? And the thing was, it's like I said, the reason I got into it, because I saw the strengths of both, and I started combining both of them. In fact, when I do my comics, you can see all these weird, sometimes you can even see like where I've been an advertising artist, for God's sakes. Even in Doug's books, hate to tell you this, buddy, but some of them look a little like advertisements. And there's a reason for that, because these elements are universal. They don't change if you're doing a graphic novel, a book cover, a poster, a billboard, an animated cartoon. It doesn't matter. The rules stay the same. It's, or at least the scaffolding does. So yeah, I basically, once I got into it though, to answer your question, even a second thing real quickly, is I got into it deep on all things and basically drowned for a short while. It's like, because once you start doing it for money and you're performing, suddenly, you know, you're in full experimentation mode, but you're also at the beck and call of the people you work for.
All right, so I do have Sean Hoade, who is responding. So just give me a second, and I just let him know that he's going to have to wait a little bit longer. All right, so what I need for you to do now is Phil, this is your first time. I know I wanted you on for another hour because I think we could do some more really incisive talks about this whole process. So
I got like a whole almost a little list of questions.
Trust me, we could babble on about them for days. It's like, you know, because I have to admit, I have a passion for art, to be honest.
Phil Morrissey, yes, Sue Phil Morrissey.
Ooh. Ooh. Ooh.
Better than me, queso, a queso.
It's like, I'm off panel now. You're scaring me, man.
All right, man. I need to get this show back under control again, because we do have our next hour guest that is waiting in the wings. And so what I would like to do is, because Phil, this is your first time. This is Phil Morrissey. All I had to do is look on the thing to see that, and I didn't know that, but now I do. Yay. Found that out about 15 minutes in, and I'm looking at that going, what is that? Great. Okay, so I got it. I figured it out. All right, so I'd like to know, Phil, what you thought about your first time experience being on Zombiepalooza Radio.
It's great, except for Doug disassembling my microphone. It was really good.
Hey, I'm gonna unplug it again now.
But no, it was excellent. It was actually. I'm glad you had me. It's been a lot of fun and whatnot. It's
Thank you.
I hope we just haven't babbled too much. That's the thing I'm worried about, to be honest.
It's a talk show. You're supposed to babble.
Well, that's true.
Well, we're very good at that.
Yeah, we got that down. Pregnant pause.
I love y'all. All right. Okay. So what I need.
Love you too, Jackie.
Phil, is I need you to give me your social media footprint and do it rather quickly.
No problem. Simple right now. The big one is the webcomic, which is stellarbabe.com. We've been doing it now for over 4 months. 14 pages in, and we already probably got about 25 pages, and we're about halfway through the first main story arc at this point. So check it out. We're there. And by the way, like I said, say thanks to Chris for that, because he did the web design, and it's great. He's just a god, to be honest. Awesome. Oh, and Tim's okay too. Artists don't care about each other, okay? No.
All right, so we're going to go over to DA Roberts, and we're going to see if he wants to, say what he thought about this particular episode that he's been on. And then I need you also to give me your social media links and stuff. And
I always love doing your show, but I've had a good time being on here with Phil, because we get to explore elements that we don't normally get to talk about, like how the unification of the art, the organic process, how the writing and the art really mesh together. And I can't imagine having done this process without Phil, because Phil, the art that Phil has done has become such an integral part of the story that it just wouldn't be the same without him. You can find anything about either of us, links to Stellar Babe or links to all of my books through darkwaterfiction.com. Phil logo, by the way.
Nice. I like it.
Thank you.
Darkwaterfiction.com has all our links to our social media, or you can find us at Darkwater Fiction on Facebook, or DA Roberts Author on Facebook, or at DA Roberts Author on Twitter.
DA Roberts is the epitome of the statement, don't quit. So.
Oh, and Stellar Babe on Facebook too. Sorry. Yeah, I just wedged that in there. Shameless plug.
You know what I'm going to do to you? I'm going to see if I can get you as a second chair co-host. I want to see how you do under pressure like that. All right? Ooh. I'm going to give it back to you.
We're in. We're so in.
Yeah. All right.